Welcome to the Happiness Squad podcast. Today we're joined by Lars Kure, a globally recognized advisor, author, facilitator, and leadership coach based in Copenhagen who focuses on helping organizations unleash the power of happiness to help them operate at their fullest potential. Lars is the best-selling author of Organizational Happiness and serves as a visiting professor at the UN-mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica. In this episode, Lars delves into his model for helping organizations find what he calls their sweet spot that lies at the intersection of purpose, compassion, and strengths. He shares a compelling case study from Boston Scientific, showing how investing in happiness helped them boost retention, performance, and innovation. In this episode, we'll also delve into the importance of using metrics and real-time insights into employee happiness to make progress on what can be a complex topic and really inspire and capture the imagination of boards and leaders to truly prioritize organizational flourishing as a core part of their strategy rather than just an employee service that they are providing. Stick around till the end, dear friends, to hear a powerful story of a personal transformation that one of the leaders Lars coached went through and what became possible for them and their organization as a result of creating a happier culture. Hi, my dear friend. It is so lovely to have you on our Happiness Squad podcast.
Hello, Ashish. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation this afternoon in Denmark. It is. I think we always have, meaningful conversations. I like that.
Yeah, same here. Friends, for those who are listening or watching, hopefully you can see the amazing energy that Lars exudes. I had a chance to meet Lars about almost a year and a half ago. I guess at this point, 2 years ago. We were taking a trip through Europe. I had taken 3 months off, but this was while I was on my way out of McKinsey to start Happiness Squad. And, I was connecting with all the different folks who do work around happiness and flourishing and to learn from them what they were doing. And I had a chance to meet Lars on LinkedIn. And then I emailed him and I said, hey, I'm going to be in Copenhagen. Are you around? And Lars kindly came over with 3 of his books, which became one of the highlights of my trip. And that's where our friendship started. And so this has been a long time coming. Since then, we've set an intention to record together. Earlier this year, we had a chance to meet together. We were co-presenters on a panel on organizational happiness at the University of Peace in Costa Rica as part of the Gross Global Happiness Summit. So I'm glad to finally have him here and for him to share his wisdom. Lars has so many years of experience in this field, Lars. But I want to, start by your origin story a bit. Share with me around how you decided to focus all of your energies on this topic around flourishing and happiness. What got you here?
Yeah, so this could be a very long story, right? In my age, but let me try to give you a few highlights or a few defining moments, I think. So originally graduated as a lawyer working in mergers acquisition in the early 90s in the IT industry. And, looking at mergers and acquisition and what I was doing from a legal point of view was, I was good at it and it worked well. But what I also recognized or discovered was that it was not really the lawyers that made the difference, right? It was the people in the organizations and how do they fit together? How do we make people work together? How do we make them stay? How do we make them flourish, perform, And from there on, I really moved into a more people HR role. And so the last 25 years, I've been in corporate executive roles within the HR field. I've been in management consulting like you. And, at some point and for me, it's always been about unlocking potential. How can we do more with what we have here? How can we do more? How can we, on an individual level, on a team level, or in an organization, how can we do more? So that's what I spent most of my awake hours on the last 25 years, I think.
25 plus years. Yeah.
And I think just to answer your question, at some point, it kind of, I think 12 years ago, I started looking into some of the work by Dr. Martin Seligman and, some of the science of happiness around that and connecting it with employee engagement. And I talked to some of my clients around this organizations and how can we find a sweet spot for working with the PERMA model, which is really Dr. Martin Seligman's work, a sweet spot for organizations so we can really tap in to that power of the science of happiness as a leader and as an organization. And that's where I I'm not sure it's the right word, slippery slope, but it's like when you get into this, it's just getting bigger and bigger, and you're having, of course, fun with it, but also it's a complex thing that you need to make quite simple for organizational leaders to work with it in an effective way. So that's been my angle.
Yeah. No, look, and I think it's, you talk about a slippery slope, vortexes can be negative, which oftentimes workplaces can be filled with. They suck you down. We bond over complaining. We bond over like, oh my God, how busy we are, right? This used to be the most common thing you heard, even at consulting firms, right? How are you doing? Oh, I'm busy. Because somehow busy was you being productive, you're doing work, and that's good, right? Which is, I'm not sure we were born to be busy. So oftentimes I used to get like these eyebrows raised when I said, I'm amazing. They're like, why? What are you amazing? What are you on? Right? I'm like, would you rather be amazing or busy? Right? Like, but anyway. But I think with this work, what you're describing is you can also create these positive spirals or vortexes that actually take you up. And then, collectively and individually, you are creating amazing impact and really operating at our fullest potential versus, interference that get in the way. In your book, you mentioned, you wrote Organizational Happiness, which I absolutely loved, right? It's the happiness sweet spot and your motivational landscape. So we're going to get into that a fair bit. And you describe that sweet spot at the intersection of purpose, compassion, and strengths. And I think that is so powerful. I think it's a really simple model. Talk to me about how you arrived at that and how you took PERMA, and as you started to apply it, came to that organizational sweet spot model.
Yeah, so it was something that we spent quite some time on, and it was almost like it was a model that I developed on a walk in nature or something like that it came to me, but on a beach actually in Costa Rica. I remember that clearly, but it was like, what if we could have a simple enabling platform for leaders and organizations to stand on so they're able to tap into that power of happiness, right? The power of the science of happiness. So you spoke to it clearly before. Because I think it was like in 2012, Harvard Business Review had like a cover issue or cover, on the Harvard Business Review talking about the happiness dividend or something like that. Schoenecker did a lot of that work in the beginning. But I think it took us, we're still talking about it, right? We're still trying to define the problem or defining what it is. And for me, I take a pride in being a practitioner. I take a pride in making things happening, going from talking about it to actually creating a change in behavior. I mean, for the benefit of, for the purpose of the benefit of the individuals, of course, in the organization, but also it's a huge opportunity for organizations. So I wanted to offer that platform for leaders and organizations, and it almost like it developed while we were doing projects, organization development projects with a few clients. So it took off, and then at some point I promised to write the book. You know that process. It's not an easy process.
Yes. No, it is not. So talk to me, let's bring it to life for our listeners, Lars. Take me through a case study. Take me through a client, either named or if you can't name them, the industry, and take me through the study of the impact that they experience and actually the journey that you took them on.
Yeah, so very often, in the beginning when you do things like this, it's a little trial and error, but now I think we have a solid platform, an effective framework to look at and use for organizational leaders. And it, like you said, it is a sweet spot between purpose, defining or developing or storytelling your purpose, tapping into strengths-based leadership, and cultivating a culture of compassion in your organization. We can maybe get back to some of that. But I think it's important to say that it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a framework where you say, okay, for me, my organization, where am I in this connected to that sweet spot? So very often, a good example is an organization. We have talked about this before, so I can mention Boston Scientific. I think they are a role model and a lighthouse and a first mover in some of this. So I've been working with them for 5 years. But that started with a scoping and training workshop with a key team from the organization. So we took them away for a couple of days, said, where are we? We scored each other on the 3 areas.
On the three dimensions.
Yeah. And said, where would it make sense to start here? And they talked about, okay, we need to be better at, and this was 4 years ago, so they have moved since then, but they said we need to be better at our employee value proposition. What is it that we offer to the market so we're able to attract the top talent in that market? And so we made a game plan, and we facilitated that game plan, but more or less they had their own internal project team to work on organizational happiness. And then we meet, and of course we train all the leaders and things like that.
And sorry, Lars, and so when they were defining the employee value proposition, I'm assuming they used purpose and what's their why as a key part of the employee value proposition, right?
That's right.
Or why should you come to choose us? Why work here? Why be a part of this team?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for clarifying that. I think, and in this example, and of course you can look at your own organization. If you're listening to this, think about your own mission, vision. Why are you here for your organization? For some organizations, this is very easy, right? I mean, like you and I, we've just been together with in a UN connection. It's easy for UN to serve a purpose, right? For some organizations, it's very difficult. So they need to develop that meaningful story that makes me want to work for you and being proud of being a part of that organization. For Boston Scientific, that was not so difficult. I mean, they're doing amazing work. They're saving lives every day, right? They're making life-saving devices. That's their business, right? I would say, looking from the outside. But sometimes it's also about telling that story in the right way. So you're telling the story to all your stakeholders, employees, future and current employees, but also to your customers and to the families, and so we worked a lot with that story.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. So that was year one. And so then take me through the journey. What happens in the year two?
So it's a good example of, like I said, it's not a one size fits all. So it's diving into it and say, where would it have most effect on these three dimensions? If we take one of them, where would you would say the business case be best, right? And for most organizations, I think the business case is on retention. It's on, there are a few KPIs, but maybe we can talk about that, the KPIs later in the business case. For Boston Scientific, where they are right now, or started last year, was we can see, because they measure on it on a regular basis, they measure on organizational happiness. And they could see the scores on compassion was going down a little bit for a lot of reasons. There could be many good reasons for that. We are all still talking about Corona and things like that. But the scores was a little low on that, and they said that will be our strategic priority or focus area for the next year. And we developed a training session for the leaders, and they are going back and committing to do something with their team. So they kind of moved from purpose, a little bit of strengths-based leadership, but they're very, very good on that. And then they moved into the compassion part and say, how can we cultivate a culture of compassion here? And right now we're talking about it as tapping into the power of belonging, actually. We're taking a little bit of a deep dive into compassion and talking also about belonging there. And some of the cases, I cannot share with you the data from Boston Scientific, but I have another case that we just did on retention, because very often when you have to deliver on the business case on organizational happiness, I very often take the KPI as retention or attrition, whatever you call it. That's the other side of that, right? But there we worked with the happiness sweet spots. We implemented, we did a baseline survey, and then 1 year later we tracked again we tracked it on a quarterly basis, and then of course the retention or the attrition was there, metric went down, and they saved, it was $708,000 in a year, right? On that. And so building that business case, it just makes it, I'm just saying that figure because it makes it a no-brainer to do it, right?
Yeah. So let's go down that path, of business case for investing in organizational happiness, right? You mentioned one of the drivers being retention as kind of a big one. What are some other ones, Lars, that when you are working with organizations, or any of the leaders who are listening to this, you want to bring the science of happiness to your organizations? What are some key elements that you would encourage them to include in the business case?
Normally, I would advocate to make a business case where you under-promise and over-deliver. That's my approach to business cases. I think it works best, and I think for HR, and we are in HR, right? We're coming from HR. We are part of that. Sometimes it's very difficult for us to build a business case that we can present in a boardroom or to the CFO. So very often I'm using retention because that just gets it, and we can see it and we can see it. So that in itself usually is enough to kick an organization happiness project off. But I would say some that is probably more return on investment, I would say, is on high performance in teams. I would say it could be customer satisfaction. It could be, innovation, things like that. Some things that are pretty, of course you can measure on it, but then can you kind of identify that it's really the organizational happiness project that delivered on that? But what we see is that these things are going up if you work with it, especially I would say compassion. I think it's an interesting, maybe it's because I'm right into it right now with an organization, but we talk about psychological safety, we talk about high performance in teams, and I think and we also talk about workplace that is broken, right? In many ways, we talk about a global workplace. You can look at the Gallup figures. We all refer to those. But I think the fix for that broken workplace is leadership. And I think in there it's the compassion part is so important, to lead with compassion.
Yeah. And look, I think we have to, I think in our own work, Lars, and the models that we're building, in our own work, the business case really needs to be very clear. So often when I'm doing this work, I build a case around profitability, productivity. We know that organizations that are happier are 20% more productive, 20+% more profitable. They have 2x higher stock market returns. Alex Edmond's work in London Business School proved causation, 2 to 3.5% higher shareholder returns versus competitors year over year. Only holds if it has to be over a longer than 4-year horizon. Organizational happiness is not a fix for short term, but long term, I think it can create a powerful strategy to create an alpha of 30 to 50% over the long term. I'm not sure of any other strategy, truly a strategy that can actually deliver that level of performance while making everything else go better, right? It's almost that lubricating wheel, because we sometimes forget that what connects strategy to execution is people. And if people are engaged, people show up fully aligned and happy, they get higher performance. I had another expert on our call, Ali. Ali is doing some really, really amazing work. So friends, if you haven't listened, I think that podcast should be released a couple of podcasts before this one. So go back and take a look at it. We'll tag him. Ali's building a very quantitative tool around this. And he builds his business case around what he calls, we help organizations eliminate crap. And he says crap. And so what's crap? C is claims risk. If your people are happier, you're going to have less mental health, burnout, and health claims. R is, he calls retention. So as you said, Lars, it should reduce your attrition. You should be able to keep more people around. A is absenteeism. You're going to have less people take time off or not actually show up and be present when they're showing up. And fourth is P. He calls it performance risk. Again, high-performing teams, you're going to be more productive, you're going to be more profitable. The invitation is to really build the fact base around where you are and where do you want to go. So we can, Lars, to your point, stand in front with the same level of base, right, with boards and engage the leadership teams to truly make this a leadership-led effort. We've got to build the business case. But the business case is there. We just need to build it for our organization because as you and I, through all the work that we've done, know that exists, and I think these organizations can win with it.
Yeah, I think very good point, and I think maybe we can speak to that because I think organizational happiness, it doesn't resonate in all boardrooms, right? For sure. I think we're getting there, and I think there's something happening. But the ability to talk about happiness in a boardroom or in a C-suite meeting, we need more of us, or more of the people that are able to take that conversation on a business case level in those meetings or in those rooms.
Absolutely.
Because I think they're too much, and I have to be a little careful here because I love yoga, I love mindfulness, I do it myself, things like that. But sometimes some of the organizational happiness that are promoted out there, it looks a little bit like a yoga class or a mindfulness class. And I think that's not how we are going to deliver on the business case, because that's just an employee service that we're offering to the organization, right?
Yes.
We need to make it a strategic priority. We need to do the business case. We need to measure on it, and we need to deliver on the business case, right? So a little bit of that, and it's a discipline that I know you and I, Ashish, we have been doing this as management consultants and things, but it's a discipline that we in HR is not very used to doing the business case. I think it's getting much better, and I think there are some great people out there doing great work.
Yeah, so look, in business cases, you talk about, you've written about the motivational landscape platform, right? An instrument that you've designed that actually allows people to be able to quantify, assess and quantify, this work, right? So it's truly grounded in real performance shifts and impact that you can see. Talk a little bit about that landscape platform. How do you define that, and how do you measure that, and what's your advice around that?
Yeah, I think so. The advice, without referring to a specific product, I can talk about the motivation landscape, but I think
yes,
from
please.
the top, I think we need to, as an organization, to have a listening strategy, right? How do we listen to our organization? And one way of doing that is having a regular pulse survey. I think that's best practice now in most organizations. I think the yearly...
How often would you do that, Lars? Yeah, how often would you pulse?
I would pulse at least once a month, depending a little bit about how many... The motivation landscape has 10 questions. It takes you, as an employee, 90 seconds to go through it. So it's not a huge effort to do it, but it gives you motivation landscape, right? It gives you... As you can look at your organization and say, where is there a smoke before it becomes a fire? Or even, I would say also, and I think we also have to look at that, do we have our lighthouses? Who are the leaders that we can learn from? So the motivation landscape is, setting up your organization and asking the 10 questions to your teams every month, or every quarter could also work. if you're coming from a very yearly based employee engagement survey. I just wanted to say that I just heard, Nick Marks in London last week, and I know that he has a notion, and I subscribe to that, talking about that a yearly employee engagement surveys, it could actually be harmful. We're spending so much resource and time on that, but what we are we are asking the questions, and these are a lot of questions, right? Maybe 50, 100 questions to every employee. Then to produce the data on it, it takes us at a HR, it takes us a month or two, and then we have to go through it with the management team, and then we kind of announce it and give it back to the leaders, right? That's sometimes...
There's a long lag. And it comes at a high resource cost.
Yeah, and that's right. And not just that, I think that's one thing. But the other thing is that then the rest of the year we are acting on old data. We're kidding ourselves. We're lying to ourselves because it's just old data from half a year ago. Of course, it gives you a picture, but I would say that use less resources and then just ask maybe 3 to 10 questions every month. That would give you that pulse. Or as a manager, that gives you, what is it that I need to speak with my team about in my next team meeting? Because sometimes it's, the food in the canteen. Or sometimes it's a really serious leadership problem, right? But you don't know, so you have to ask.
We hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to start building habits and integrating the Hardwired for Happiness practices into your life, come check out Rewire, our program on the Happiness Squad website. Rewire contains 30 5-minute micro practices that can help you truly build habits for a happier, healthier life filled with more love and meaning. The program uses the science of habit formation and the power of community to support you in moving from knowing to doing to being. Now, back to the episode. You have to ask, and look, this is something that at the work we're doing in Happiness Squad, we're like, this is front and center, right? Friends, I invite you to just think about the following. I think that Lars is highlighting and inviting us and encouraging us to do the same, which is when it comes to physical assets, you look at data continuously almost every hour, if not every minute. If you've ever run a factory, we have now sensors that are literally, or marks that show how many units per hour is this line running versus the rated capacity versus the target. But somehow when it comes to human assets, we think 1 year is okay. Imagine if you ran your physical assets at the same cadence and with the same lag. 6 months after looking at one snapshot, you take action. Where would your business be? Now think about where your investments are. Are you investing more in people or machines? And if you're investing more in people, what would it take you to get to a more rigorous, more accurate, more real-time insights into where people are? I'm also going to highlight something else for you, because this can become it can feel very overwhelming. Many HR departments are under-resourced, and so this can be a real challenge. Like, hey, it takes us so much just to process the engagement survey. How the hell are we going to do this? And for that one, I offer you a real example. So at my time at McKinsey, all 17 years, we did not measure organizational happiness, but for sure we measured something using an instrument called the team barometer on how as a team we were operating. All teams, almost 20,000 teams at some point that were deployed, got their a team barometer. It was a team-specific thing. No center person was involved in actually making sense of it overall. The team got their barometer benchmarked against other teams in the industry or in the particular office complex they were part of. And it was really, as Lars said, a way for the team to have a conversation around, hey, what's getting in the way of us operating at our fullest potential? What's an action I can take? So it's a real time, and we really use our people who know the small steps that they can take. We put the power back to them, and we resource and reduce the resource load. So I love the work you're doing, Lars, around this. I think more and more companies, if we go to a continuous listening strategy rather than a once-a-year listening strategy, and we truly democratize and make create autonomy for teams to take action, I think we see faster response. We see a more nimble and effective way to implement this work that we are talking about.
Yeah, I think great point. As I said, you put it much better than I could. So it's I think that that board meeting or management meeting where you kind of evaluating your KPIs. I think you always have the financial performance and your customer satisfaction, right? Almost in real time data now. But on employee engagement or happiness, but flourishing or performance, you accept that it's a yearly thing or maybe a. So thank you for pointing out so clearly. I think that's very important. And I think if you are an HR, I think looking into best practice in this area is a big thing. It makes a huge difference for the conversations you actually have in your organization.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit. I'm quite curious. I want to go, we can go deep and we can just have a whole series of conversations here, right, around purpose and strengths and compassion. But compassion is something that is not commonly talked about in the workplace. And in fact, there might be many leaders who say compassion is a weakness. I would rather drive my teams to get to the performance. That's always worked for me. What's been your experience as you've talked about compassion and some real practical tips, Lars, through which we can create compassionate workplaces?
Yeah, so first, I think we have to look into the research around it. I mean, first we need to define what is compassion. And this could be a longer conversation among a lot of wise people, but from my perspective, working with leaders organizations, the definition of compassion is an interest in other people's difficulties and a burning desire to do something about it.
Yes.
So there is both an interest, that's the empathy part, I would say, but there's also an action part, which is I have a desire to do something about it. So I think if we want to talk about this, we should talk about the definition also. And then I think we need to, as leaders, accept or look into the research and say, compassionate leadership is one of the most effective leadership styles that you have. And this can be a little mind-blowing, especially for when I do leadership training and we talk about effective leadership styles, right? How can you work with people? How can you influence people? How can you make people work with you in the team and things like that? How can you have high performance in teams? And I think from there is a direct correlation between projecting warmth, which I think is a part of compassion, projecting trust, so you're connecting with people, which is a building block for psychological safety, right? Which is a building block for high performance in teams. So there is a direct correlation. So if you kick off your team with projecting your own ego or your status or your Harvard or your Harvard certificates or whatever you come with, right? That's not projecting warmth. It's not connecting you. That's just your ego speaking, right? As a leader. So I think that how do you connect with your team to actually create that trust and psychological safety and high performance? And when we do...
So if you're a leader, right? So if you're a leader, Lars, sorry to interrupt you, but if you're a leader, what are some 2-3 ways in which you can both cultivate your own compassion capacity, but actually show up that way with your teams? What would they do?
There are 2 things when we work with cultivating a culture of compassion in organizations. The 2 things I usually say and that we're working on, it's paying attention and being present. And these are 2 different things. I think, the presence thing is something that we don't feel a lot. I think you and I have it right now here in a virtual form, right? But it's not something that we feel very often. And it's more and more difficult for us as a leader to be present with another human being. But if you are able to do that just for 2 minutes, it's not a 1-hour thing, but for 2 minutes, you can move mountains. And this is where, that's where performance is, but that's also where connection is. It's also where you start to understand what's going on with the people in your organization. How do you best manage and lead and serve the people in your organization? So the presence part, and of course, this is something you can train. You know about this, as maybe you can share a little bit about that. But it's something that it's almost, it's a listening skill, it's a mindset, and it's also, taking away a little bit of the electronic around us when we're speaking to other people. Because, I have a watch that tells me that there is a text on my phone, and immediately when I feel that little, I might be able to juggle it and try to keep attention, right? But there's something here that makes me think about what's going on. Is it one of the kids is it what's going on? And immediately we lose the connection. Then I'm not present. And then I lose the opportunity for the connection, right?
Yeah, I love it. Attention and presence are two important elements. And oftentimes we are not paying attention to the human. We are often paying attention to the problem that needs to be solved. And that problem is often creating a triggered response in our bodies and in our minds, right? So we're not regulated. We are in the grips of the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, which is then getting in the way of being present. Because I'm talking with you, you're sharing your problem. I'm not really present with you. I'm already thinking about all the different ways I've solved this before. I'm thinking about, maybe judging, like, why can't you figure this out? I have 7 other problems as a leader I need to solve. Why are you making my life hard? And I'm thinking about the future or what is going to happen if this doesn't get solved. I am not present. I am not present. I am somewhere there. My body is here, but my mind is not. And so I think what you're inviting leaders to do is, be present. And I think for me, what I have been practicing a lot of, Lars, is just consciously bringing attention to my breathing and to the quality of my breathing. So I constantly, every 30 minutes to an hour, at least take 5 or 6 deeper breaths. In fact, when we are dealing with a problem, my initial reaction always used to be to jump in. And now I always try and take 6 breaths, because till my nervous system is regulated, till I am really present, till I'm really sensing, the most creative set of solutions that I could offer or inquire about, those are not accessible to me. They're just not there. I'm practicing that a lot myself, of trying to be present. And by the way, so often we are not even, we don't want to know sometimes about hardships outside of work that somebody is going through. Because even when we talk about attention and present, I want to talk about your problems here. How often do we really want to engage? And I have many leaders who say, well, why do I care about that? It's not my job to solve somebody's personal problems. No, it's not your job to solve somebody's personal problems. But we all care about person more than the office. And if that person is showing up here with a personal problem, they're not fully here for you. They're not resourced. And so it's not an invitation to solve a personal problem, but at least sense it and offer a bit of space to that person. If they're dealing with a sick parent or a sick child or whatever they're going through it. Sometimes compassion is not about acting to solve. Compassion might be just acting to create space.
Yeah, I love that. It's and it makes me reflect a little bit on some of the work we're doing with some leaders right now. It's like a big part of that compassion part of feeling that is also being seen, right, for who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole person, and you need to accept that I'm a whole person, and I bring everything to work, right? If we're talking about it in the organization and workplace. So somehow we need to feel that we are being seen as who we are, because that's also a part of how do I contribute best to my team, to my organization, and how can I perform best, right, in my given situation. So thank you.
No, this has been an amazing, amazing conversation, my friend. So talk to me about a leader. As we wrap up, I want to leave friends with our listeners with a story about a leader who went through a journey with you, right? A transformation, and the impact of them out there, but also the impact of them in here. Like, what changed in them?
Ah, that's a great question. So let me start in another, because this is something that you very often it's in a one-to-one session, or it's in a like a training session that we're doing. We talked about earlier, I think, positive leadership and organizational happiness, and sometimes having leaders in that room for a couple of days and even have ongoing one-to-one sessions. And then you meet them 5 years later and they tell you it's something I've been using every day, right? And one leader I'd share that it's in Asia. It's a leader in Asia. And when I met her, she was in a difficult environment, but in a very male-dominant environment, I would say. So the values projected there were very high performing, very directing, as you mentioned that as an example. And we talked about how can you in that environment be effective in having a different leadership style. How can you be a role model for other leaders, including other female leaders, of course, but other leaders? How can you be that? And we talked about servant leadership. We talked about what can I do for you so you become a success. I like that approach because that's compassion, right? The big part of compassion is servant leadership. And I think we were able to give her the tools, or she was able to put that learning, that reflection into her everyday leadership role. And later becoming that top, not the CEO, but becoming that divisional executive for a big part of the organization because of her leadership style, because of creating high performance in teams by projecting compassionate leadership, I would say. And now we're working, of course, I think that's a big part of organizational development is also creating lighthouses and role models that you can look at, right? And how do you do more of that? So we have some examples.
Nothing is possible. Yes, no, that'll be amazing. Nothing is possible out there, right? Organizations are made up of individuals, and that's kind of where I wanted to kind of, make the arc. Often things we are working on things out there. No, nothing is possible there till you change the person in here, right? How we show up. And sometimes that work is not easy, as you and I both know, and can take a long time. And it's also not a linear process, right? It's not that you take on a journey and you emerge great. It's a messy process. Caterpillars don't become butterflies in a nice, pretty setting. The cocoon is a pretty messy place to be. It's gooey and there's a lot of breaking and there's a lot of emerging. And I don't know if it's painful for it or not, but, I'm not sure it is pleasant, to say the least. But I think we have to be brave and courageous to be willing to do the work. We end up hitting a wall of individual and organizational constraints that truly keep us from operating at our fullest potential. So friends, as we wrap up, Lars, it's been amazing to have you. Check out, I'm going to pull up and we're going to put the link in the podcast show notes, Lars's book, Organizational Happiness. It's a really simple, easy to read book. It's filled with tips. That's one of the things I loved about it, Lars, is, it's filled with tips and things that, anyone can start to implement right away. And then, of course, if you want to engage and do this work and you feel called, we'll have information, Lars, on how people can reach you. But my friend, this has been such an amazing conversation. I am so grateful for the work that you're doing. I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully at the GGH next year, if not even sooner. But thank you. Thank you for giving us the gift of your time and your wisdom of your years and sharing that with our listeners.
Thank you so much, Ashish. It's been a pleasure we could have this conversation forever, right? Because there's so many things. And I think you spoke just to that. I think just to invite more change makers, real change makers into this field. I hope that what the work you're doing here and the conversations we're having are inviting more people into this space as real change makers, both in organizations, in the world. So thank you for doing that effort. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Be well, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashish.
Bye. That wraps up another episode of the Happiness Squad podcast. We hope you found the insights actionable to enhance your journey towards happiness and fill your life with more joy, health, love, and meaning. Please consider leaving us a review and share the podcast with anyone in your professional or personal life who you feel will benefit from some of these very insights. It's a really simple way to extend support and spread positivity. Take care, and remember, happiness is a choice that's available to you moment to moment in the here and now. Take care and see you next week.